Well, are we all sitting comfortably? Then I shall begin. Well, there's not much point in introducing Richard, so I'll pass that over. And Terry Sanderson, who's the president of the National Secular Society. Then we have Hamid, Taqvaee, a renowned political and social commentator and analyst. Bahram, Soroush, a founding and executive committee member of the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. And we have Joan Smith, who is a novelist, columnist, human rights activist, chaired PEN for 4 years, and an SS Honorary Associate, as Richard is. And have I left anybody out? Is Mina coming up? No, she is. Right. Okay. Right. Now, as I said, the subject is really RE and faith schools. And I'm going to abuse my position of chair again and actually ask the first question, just to get things going. There's going to be plenty of opportunity for people to speak from the floor. But I'm going to ask the question of the panel in a context of the number of people in minority faith schools in the UK, or rather people of minority faith in the UK, is going to double between now and 2040. And I'm going to assume, for the purposes of this question, that we're unable to stop the government's mad idea to proliferate these publicly funded minority faith schools. So on that hypothesis, and I haven't given up, but on that hypothesis, I'm going to ask the panel, what demands should we make about any of these new schools, in particular Muslim schools? For example, girls being excluded from certain subjects, segregation of pupils and teachers by gender, and the teaching of sex education, and finally, lots of time spent on the Quran or other so-called holy book. Could we perhaps start off with Joan Smith?
Thank you, Keith. I want to start by saying something about Sarah Palin, who is ubiquitous and unavoidable at the moment. And I wrote last week that she's simultaneously probably the most ridiculous and the scariest woman on the planet at the moment. And I was very interested when it emerged that her daughter was pregnant. And I was very interested by the way people reacted, in particular by how the Obama campaign reacted, because they simply said, this is off limits, this is a private matter. And I was very shocked by that, because this is a woman who believes in a form of sex education, which is just to tell children and young people not to have sex. And I looked it up I looked up recent issues of the BMJ, and they had a survey of different types of sex education, what was effective and what wasn't. And categorically, this kind of abstinence, what they call abstinence-based sex education, is totally ineffective. And this woman's daughter, unfortunate daughter, who's being paraded on stage with her fiancé, as he now is a living example of the failure of this type of sex education. And yet, schools are being encouraged to, in the United States, to promote this kind of ineffective sex education. 750,000 young women under the age of 17 get pregnant every year in the United States. 80% of them, they're what's called unplanned pregnancies. And these girls are in communities where it's hard to get an abortion, where there's a social stigma against abortion. So one of my major worries about the proliferation of faith schools in this country is the kind of sex education those children are getting. And it seems to me that the national curriculum has to insist on minimum standards in terms of not segregating children, but also in terms of making sure that young people have proper sex education, that they know about abortion and things like that. So that's some of the areas that I think we should make demands in.
Terry Sanderson.
Well, last year the Muslim Council of Britain published a leaflet about what they wanted to see in schools for Muslim pupils, and it was very extreme. It was about not wanting to do music, not wanting to do swimming, not wanting to do anything where they had to take their clothes off. And no figurative drawing, this kind of thing. And they hoped that this would be taken seriously by the government and imposed on schools. Fortunately, it wasn't. But it gives an idea of where we're going. Because as the government brings more and more of these Islamic schools into the state sector, their argument is that if we bring them in from the private sector, we'll be able to impose the national curriculum on them, we'll be able to keep an eye on what's going on in them. In actual fact, that won't happen. What will happen is that the national curriculum will change to suit the Muslim schools. They will start to undermine it almost immediately. There will be calls for the kinds of changes that were in that MCV booklet for, a different education for girls and that kind of thing. I think we're going down a very dangerous path here, and I don't think that there is an answer other than to abolish the whole faith school system. If we're living in a society of equality, we cannot rightly say to minority faith communities, you can't have schools, but the Catholics and the Protestants and everybody else can. That just won't hold water anymore. So I think the only way out of that is to secularize the education system completely, so that there's, the demand is not there. They did it in America, they did it in France, they did it in Turkey. There's no religious schools there. Well, there are religious schools, but they're mostly paid for by the parents who use them. And, really, you can't deny them that right either. But I think, while one religion has its own faith schools, another religion cannot be denied it. And there's no doubt that Muslim schools are different. They're not the same as Christian schools, which have got a long history and have been tamed and drawn into an extent, although they're beginning to get wild again now. I think that Muslim schools are overly religious. They're run by theocrats. Their first purpose is religious education and religious indoctrination, not academic study. And I've seen this, I did a podcast with The Guardian, and it was about Muslim schools particularly, and they'd done a bit of research and gone to a Muslim girls' school in Manchester. And they'd interviewed one of the girls who was very well educated, she'd done very well, and they said, well, you're saying that the school has an overwhelmingly Islamic ethos, and that Islam superimposes itself on all lessons. What does that amount to? How does that work? And she said, well, for instance, if we're in a biology class and we're doing something about the human reproductive system, we will be taught the scientific explanation and then the Quranic explanation, and they will be put together and you can make up your own mind. So in these schools, that kind of anti-scientific, pre-scientific education is happening now with our taxpayers' money, and it will increase as these theocratic people get a further grip on education, and they're being aided and abetted in this ambition by the government for some reason. Well, we know that there are lots of reasons, one of which is political. But we have to be very careful. I think Muslim schools are different. They've got to be opposed. But the only way to oppose them is to completely secularize the education system.
We're now going to ask Hamid Taqvaee for his perspective, please.
Yeah, I think religious school is a contradiction in terms. Because school by I just said that I think religious school is a contradiction in terms, because the school is supposed to be a place that you teach children, science and the truth about the world, about everything, about different phenomena. And by definition, religion is about faith. They themselves say that you cannot teach or learn faith. And you can, of course, brainwash children, but it has got nothing to do with the learning. So when you put a question like this, that what we can do to somehow modify faith-based school, my answer is you cannot do anything. You just have to ban them. You don't call them schools. We have to have a system, public education, that's a place that you teach and learn science and only science. And that's all. Now, every religion, they want to have their own brainwashing institute that call them schools or whatever. It's their own problem. Has nothing to do with the public. The government shouldn't support them. There should be no budget for them. So the other thing that you said by 2040, we're going to have more minority faith schools in London. I don't know, in Europe. I don't know why, because I think by 2040 the situation in the world would be much different. I assure you that we would get rid of Islamic Republic in Iran, and you wouldn't have any sort of political Islam that we have today, and we would call again immigrants, not minority faith people that come here.
Just on a point of fact, or at least a projection anyway, the figure that I meant to express was that the projection is that the number of people from minority faith in the UK will double by 2020.
I don't call them. I come from Islamic country. I don't call myself, I have no faith.
I see.
So, you cannot just label people. People come here, we used to call them immigrants. Now, after that Islamic political Islam movement, suddenly everybody is minority faith. I don't agree with that labeling.
I think that's a wonderful point. Now, Bahram, Soroush, your perspective, please.
Okay. I also think that schools and religion and children and religion don't mix. They don't go together. You can't have... it's not just because schools are places of learning, but also because they house children. Children are vulnerable. They have to be protected. Child protection laws should apply in schools as well. Just as we physically, we protect children from physical and sexual abuse, we should protect them from emotional, psychological, religious, ideological abuse. I really think it's child abuse, and children look up to grown-ups, and especially those who are in a position of authority, like a teacher. If, as Terry mentioned, in Muslim schools, they teach both evolution and creationism, and say, you make up your mind. It's coming from the teacher. What do you expect the child, how do you expect a child to make up his or her mind? And I think, it's really important that we regard, any demands, in answer to your question that we make, the demand cannot be reform of religious schools. It cannot be reformed. And I agree with the other panelists that the only demand is to dismantle faith schools.
I've been standing here in trepidation, hoping that nobody actually says a Muslim child. We're waiting for an explosion from my left, and I don't think anybody did. Richard, please.
What Keith is alluding to there is one of my bees in my bonnet, to the extent that I've become a bore about it. Do not ever call a child a Muslim child, or a Christian... What's happened to the microphone? Or a Christian child, or a Protestant child, or a Catholic child. I think the microphone's gone off. Is it okay? That is a form of child abuse, because at least a young child is too young to know what its opinions are about the cosmos, about morality, about history. It is evil to describe a child as a Muslim child or a Christian child. And by the same token, when one projects demographically into the future and says that by 2020 the population of France, or whatever it is going to be so-and-so % Muslim, realize the hidden assumption that lies beneath that, which is that every child of Muslim parents is going to grow up a Muslim. Every child of Christian parents is going to grow up a Christian. That's what we've got to fight against. If we could wave a magic wand and break the cycle, the deadening cycle of education from one generation to the next, if the scissors could cut that cycle for one generation, then we could probably kill religion off altogether. It's precisely because we allow religion to have what it dearly, dearly wants, which is a monopoly of education, that we have so many of the problems that we do have. I went to an Anglican school, and I suppose it could be fairly said that I had a faith-based education, and it was pretty innocuous. I can't claim that I was, in a damaging way, indoctrinated. And in a way, that's just the problem, because so many people in this country, and parliamentarians and things, think, oh, religion's rather nice. It's sort of going to church on a Sunday evening and hearing the organ playing and evensong and nice, meaningless sermons that nobody listens to. And so those of us who went through that kind of religious education, many of us end up unscathed. And therefore people will think, oh, it can't do any harm, let's keep the Church of England schools, let's keep the Catholic schools. And then, of course, the door is opened, as my colleagues have been saying, the door is open to other faiths, saying, well, we want a bit of that too. We must have our faith schools. And then we have all the problems that have been alluded to. So I agree with my colleagues that the only solution ultimately is the abolition of faith schools. However, Keith began by saying we're not allowed to go for that pie-in-the-sky ideal. We've got to think, given that the government is not going to do that, what would we recommend? So something politically more manageable. And I wonder whether, again to pick up what some of my other colleagues have said, would it be possible to allow them to exist, but to say, when you teach religion, you have to teach about religion, not indoctrinate. Of course, indoctrination is the only thing they want to do, so they'll squeal about that. But that is a possible intermediate step if we think if it can't be done to abolish faith schools altogether. If you tell a child, you are a Muslim and therefore you believe X, or you are a Catholic and therefore you believe X, that's evil. And I think you can convey that to people, actually. People get it when I put it, when I say, you don't ever talk about a postmodernist child. I mean, you laugh. You don't talk about a Keynesian child or a Gramscian Marxist child. You don't automatically assume that a parent's beliefs about economics, about politics, about anything else are automatically injected into the child like a smallpox vaccination. It's the opposite of vaccination. And let's say a vaccination that actually makes the child develop smallpox when it grows up. We don't automatically assume that a parent's political opinions or opinions about football teams or whatever it is are going to automatically, without even questioning, become a label for the child. You don't say, this is an ornithological child because its father is an ornithologist. You don't say, as I said, this is a secular humanist child. Do we? I hope we don't. Because the parents are. And yet nobody bats an eyelid when people talk about Muslim children or Christian children. It is the one exception to what seems like total common sense, to the extent that you laugh when I make the allusion to a postmodernist child. Religion is the one exception And, of course, they love it that way. That's just the way they want it. But couldn't we raise consciousness about that? Whenever you hear anybody talking about a Muslim child or a Christian child or a Catholic child, stop them and say, you wouldn't dream of talking about a socialist child or a conservative child, would you? And they get it. As soon as you put it like that, they immediately get it.
Can I follow up from that, Keith? I've just been in Sierra Leone, which stopped being a British colony in 1961, and I was there. I'm involved in a literacy project in Sierra Leone. 60% of the population is now defined as Muslim. And I was talking to the heads of 25 schools in a town outside Freetown, and they brought the children out to meet us. And what was incredibly striking was now these little girls of 6 and 7 are wearing the hijab already. And I took a lot of photographs of the children who were in what are called Christian schools. So, you know, it's a sort of diluted form of religious school. And the children who were in the Muslim schools. And ever since I came back, and I've been showing these pictures to people, the contrast is so extraordinary, because these little girls who are, they would say, Muslim girls, are wearing the hijab from 6, 7. They look incredibly cowed and miserable. And, you know, do they have any choice about wearing the hijab in the Sierra Leone? Of course they don't. And that raises for me the whole question of the headscarf here. And I am very, very, very opposed to the idea of little girls being forced to wear religious dress in schools. Now, if an adult woman says to me, I voluntarily choose to wear some form of veil, whether it's the niqab, the hijab, or whatever, then I disagree with her, and I insist on the right to disagree with her. I wouldn't try to stop her doing that. What I do think is wrong is to impose that upon little girls. And I took part in a debate around this time last year, where I was debating with Inayat Bunglawala of the Muslim Council of Britain, and we had quite a sort of famous exchange where I invited him to condemn the practice of stoning women to death, and he wouldn't. But I was very struck by a woman getting up in the audience, a European, I assume, British woman, and defending the practice of what she called hijabbing. And I had no idea there's now a verb to hijab. And she said, oh, but lots and lots of mindful girls are hijabbing all the time. And I was really taken aback by the idea that, you know, I hijab, you hijab, he hijabs. Well, possibly not he. Yeah, that's where it all breaks down. But I find it incredibly offensive that as taxpayers we are paying for little girls to be forced to wear a religious dress, which is a manifestation for me of shame culture. And you can see that little girls who are forced to wear this are being told from a very early age that there is something wrong with being a woman, there is something wrong with your sexuality, and I find it incredibly objectionable, and I think that should be one of our primary demands. If these schools are going to exist, children should not be forced into this kind of wearing this kind of religious dress.
Would you like us to make sure that the most possible people get a chance to speak? Right. Now, the way we're going to do it is that you are going to restrict yourselves to 2 sentences, be they statements or questions, and we're going to take them in groups of 5, okay? Now, do I have your agreement, all of you, to do that? Because if you put up your hand and it's more than 2 sentences, I shall stop you. Okay, right. We'll start with that guy right at the back with the dark blue shirt on. 2 sentences, yes, when he gets his, as soon as he gets his microphone.
One to Richard: how about the Royal Society taking a stand against faith schools? One to Joan: unfortunately in schools we have problems regarding school uniforms. In the summer we had the Sikh Bangle girl, and they talk about the right of the child, and you have these stupid teenage girls saying, I demand to wear the hijab, I demand to wear the Sikh bangle. Please, Joan, what do you suggest we do?
Right, that's it. Next one, please. And when we're going upstairs for a few more, but we'll do 5 down here first, all from this side, so that the microphone isn't running out all over the place. This guy here with the black...
Yeah, my real concern is that faith schools is an opportunity to let Section 28 in by the back door. There's a hell of a lot of homophobia in these schools, and it's time we confronted this.
Right. That lady there in the beige. Microphone not quite so close to her.
No. Richard suggests that we teach about faith, but does this have to be done in RE classes? Can't we just learn, or we need to know through art and history and so on?
Right, another two more from this side, please. The guy behind there, that's right, you take.
I've recently become a grandfather 3 times, and I'm suddenly faced with the realization that my grandchildren have got blank minds and I've got a great influence on them potentially, and so have their parents. I turn to children's books to start reading them, and I find that the ones which come to my attention are based on fairies, witches and nymphs and elves. Very few ones about tank engines and reality. And I wonder whether parents and grandparents haven't got a significant role in influencing our children against weird ideas.
Hold on, you've had your 2 sentences. Could we go back to the lady standing up there at the back with the black hair?
Mr. Dawkins, I'd just like to ask, does he think that faith schools are a form of child abuse? Right.
Now, could you take the microphone upstairs and then the panel can answer those questions?
Yeah, I'd like to say something about religious education and what form it should take, and the lady there who suggested that it should be taught throughout the curriculum rather than having specific religious education lessons. And I think that would take away a lot of the danger that religious education poses. In the NSS, we've had a flood of letters in the last few weeks from parents who have been upset when their kids came home from school telling them all kinds of weird and wonderful ideas that they've been fed by evangelical groups that have been brought into the school. They weren't part of the national curriculum. They'd just been brought in because they couldn't find teachers who were well qualified enough to conduct collective worship and religious education. So these evangelicals are brought in, and they are very well equipped to indoctrinate. They don't educate. They don't come into the school with any intention of just giving the facts about religion and saying some people believe this, some people don't. They come in with a gentle Jesus agenda, and it's relentless. So, yes, I think religious education has to be done away with. I know a lot of people will say, and a lot of people within this movement say, if you don't have a religious education, then you won't be able to understand the culture that you live in. How can you understand art and literature and so on if you don't know about religion? Well, my answer is, you don't need to know about religion to appreciate these things. And you certainly don't need to have it pummeled into your head day after day after day for 15 years that you're at school. So I think it's very important that we rethink religious education very, very radically. It has got to be stripped of this power of indoctrination, because at the moment it's in the hands of clerics, and they are never, ever going to be objective.
Bahram, Soroush?
Yeah. I also think religious education should be abolished for the same reasons that religion does not belong in schools. It doesn't belong anywhere, but least of all in schools, where you have children and it's a place of learning. And also, in response to the argument, then how do we teach children about different religions, improve their understanding of religions in a very objective way? I think the solution could be, in the curriculum, a history of ideas, generally, philosophy, history of ideas, nothing to do with religion, and also in a critique of religion, wherever, because it stands against science, a scientific criticism of religion in schools. But I think, a general education about ideas, history of ideas, I think that could be a replacement, but not religious education.
Richard.
To understand literature, you need to know about Thor and Wotan. You need to understand about Zeus and Apollo and Jupiter and Mars and Yahweh and Jesus and Muhammad. And so these can all be treated in a similar kind of way, with no privileging being given to anyone. I agree that with the lady who suggested it doesn't have to be in RE, it's a branch of anthropology, history of ideas, etc. Fairies and elves, I've always worried about this, and I'm sometimes portrayed as a bit of a curmudgeon for worrying about teaching children about fairies and elves and magic spells. It's often said it doesn't do any harm. I wonder whether it really doesn't, because I think if you're brought up, obviously children end up not believing in magic spells, although it goes on for quite a long time. But if you're brought up from childhood to believe that magic spells are achievable, then the idea of miracles, the idea of Jesus turning water into wine and Hamid splitting the moon in two and things, don't sound so odd. And I would be in favour of substituting scientific realism, which actually is far more wonderful and far more amazing than fairies and elves and magic spells. Somebody asked me specifically whether I think faith schools are child abuse. I think that labelling children is child abuse, and I think that really heavy indoctrination, for example, teaching children about hell, torturing their minds with hell, is a form of child abuse which could be even worse than physical child abuse. Could I recommend an article by the psychologist Nicholas Humphrey, with originally an Amnesty lecture, called What Are We Going to Tell the Children?, which has been reprinted in various places. N.K. Humphrey, not an S on the end, What Are We Going to Tell the Children? And it's a very, very powerful article. It's rather, for some people's taste, too powerful. He suggests that we should no more indoctrinate children with nonsense than we should knock their teeth out. And that it's a form of mental abuse which is comparable to physical abuse. And it's a matter of judgment which is worse. But I would want to make the case that teaching a young child, terrifying a young child, about hell when it dies, is arguably as bad as many forms of physical abuse.
Hamid.
Yeah, the point that I wanted to make is what just Richard said previously about the children having, we have no right to call a child a Muslim or a Christian just because he was born into that religion, or his or her parents were with Muslim or Christian. I just wanted to go further than that. And for the same reason, I think even the adults, they have no option other than having their own parents' religion. I mean, who's convinced to be a Christian, or who's been convinced to be a Muslim? You are Muslim, we get born. Either you don't care and you become atheist and you just let it go, or you just Christian or Muslim. I mean, there is no reasoning here. There is no conviction here. There is no matter of going to different, say, nobody's going to read Bible and Quran and Torah and the others and then say, okay, this one is my faith or that one is my faith. You're just born into it. That's why it should have nothing to do with the schools, with children. It's not about truth. It's not about the word. It's about just superstitions that's been used by whoever is the representative of God on that era, on that time. That's all it is. Yes. So that's, I think, the very basic reason that religion has nothing to do with children, has nothing to do with the process of teaching and learning, and it should be abolished.
Joan. Sorry.
I wanted to come back to your point about the girl who went to court about wearing the Sikh bangle. And when I saw pictures of that and her family and friends celebrating, I thought, what an incredible world we live in. This girl is probably clinically obese. This girl has a very serious health problem, and her parents are kind of supporting her in this ridiculous argument about whether she can wear a bracelet or not. And that is the kind of topsy-turvy world, I think, that these kind of religious convictions produce, because they get the priorities wrong. And I think the school uniform point is an important one. I never liked wearing school uniform as a kid because, you know, I like fashion too much and I like high heels, which didn't kind of go with what I was expected to wear at school. But I wore it for a simple reason, which is that I saw it as an expression of a kind of egalitarianism, and that everybody wears the same, and that we have some kind of communal values, and one of those is that we are all worth the same, regardless of, you know, what our religious background is or was. I mean, when I was at school, I didn't know what people's religion was on the whole. I mean, I've written about this. I didn't think of, oh, that's my Catholic friend, that's my Methodist friend, you know, one or two girls from other faiths. I just thought of them as people. And this, what I object to particularly about religious schools is this privileging one part of somebody's identity. It's not even their identity, as Richard said. It's actually their parents' chosen identity or inherited identity, that being imposed on the children. So I think that this line about insisting on school uniform is incredibly important. And I also think your point about homophobia is very important too. I was over at Toynbee Hall speaking last week, and I was talking to a gay friend, and he said there'd been a spate of homophobic attacks by young Bengali men on gay men in the area. And, you know, one would guess that some of those may have a kind of intolerance of homosexuality, which comes from Islam.
Yeah, thank you. Right, now, we're going up to an elevate to a higher plane, and we're going to take 5 questions from the top, and I'm glad to see that the microphone's up there. Can we take the guy right in the middle at nearest you, down first row there, and then the gentleman over there, and that lady there, next.
Yep. Try to. Great, we heard before.
Remember the 2 sentences.
Can I get 3? We don't want to basically be preaching the converted, we want to be reaching out to the rest of the community, and I think the best way to do that with regards to RE is to get on SACREs, which is basically the Standing Advisory Council for Religious Education. Every LEA has one. And you can be part of the Group D by going to your LEA and saying, can I represent the local community, and so on and so forth. And you can change the way collective worship happens, the way that RE is taught in your local area. It just requires you to get involved yourself. And that's how you change things.
Thank you. Now, over to this side. This gentleman over here with the blue shirt, dark blue shirt.
Hi, David Britton, Bed's Humanist. We know that we don't like sectarian schools.
Could you speak up a little, please?
David Britton, Bed's Humanist. Now, we know we don't like sectarian schools. We call them sectarian schools, not faith schools. And I don't think we should underestimate the importance of this question. I feel personally immensely fortunate and proud to live in a tolerant country, but I do fear that sectarian schools threaten not just children who go to sectarian schools, but all of our children. I think we must face the problem, however much resistance we meet, because if we lose, the alternative in 25 years' time is frankly unthinkable.
Thank you. Now, over to the one with the hand up on that side. Sorry to make you walk so fast.
It's a long while since I've been called a lady.
Sorry about that, Jack.
That's all right. I've worked for several years on a campaign for secular education website, so I've had a lot of experience about different views. And I'd like to ask the panel or suggest to them that there's no disagreement, I don't think, on faith schools, but there is disagreement on whether there should be any input in schools to religion. Because if you don't have any potential independent voice on teaching about religion, and that is hopefully teaching it as a rights issue, both for children to be taught independently about the honest and objective views about religion, and about it as an educational issue, in that you don't teach any subject, you don't touch any opinion as fact. That is not education. And if you don't have that in schools, then you leave the field entirely open to parents and pastors and priests and imams and whatever. And this is what they have in the United States. So we wouldn't have that potential. A second point is that...
Oh, come on, Sue, I'm afraid no, I would really... The person in the corner, please.
Sorry, just a couple of questions. One was regarding Hamid's statement where he said that people don't have conviction in what they may believe. I did disagree just because generally it doesn't matter whether something's actually true or it may not even be actually right, but someone can still have conviction in something that could be completely false. So I just regarding that. And then secondly, when you were talking about ruling religion out of the educational system, the problem is it's ruling out a big element of politics, because systems such as communism also have a sort of large view on what precedes this life, what comes after this life, and would be described as most as a religion. So it would be difficult to distinguish which religions would expunge and which we wouldn't. Just
right,
thoughts
thank you.
on it.
Right, now finally the warden over here on the left, and then we can come downstairs with the microphone while the panel are answering those questions. No, there's nothing more from this side at the moment, but it'll be a while before we come back to you. I see you. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, before I ask my question, I wanted to just say about my experience. My 7-year-old daughter sometimes comes to me, asks me a question, Daddy, how people become Muslim or Christians, blah, blah, blah. And one day she came from school, she said, Daddy, I wonder why you're not Muslim, because your mom was Muslim. And I had to think how to explain to her. And I said, oh, I'm not. But she said, I think there's, whose mom is Muslim, they should become Muslim, or whose mom is Christian, they should become Christian. And I said, why do you think I'm not then? Then she said, I think, Daddy, when they're babies in the mommy's tummy, something wrong there happens. Then that's why they are not Muslim. That's how painful it is for parents. Yeah, my question is, we educate next generation, but the generation who wants to educate next generation themselves, they need to be educated. Who is going to educate them? One, secondly, how we are going to do that? Is that only me or you are going to educate? The other people have got power. They are educated differently. How we can take a scissor and cut them without challenging the power?
Right, thank you. Right. Okay, now can we start off with Joan Smith this time?
Well, I think what I want, yes, I think that's quite an important question. And it does seem to me that what we actually need is very, very good research. Because people, I mean, Steve Jones has said to me and to other people that he's shocked that a third of his students actually believe in creationism, which is gobsmacking if true. And on the other hand, I have friends who are Catholics and send their children to Catholic schools, and they say, oh, there's nothing better, nothing more likely to make you an atheist than sending you to a Catholic school. And I think that's kind of contorted logic. But what I suspect is that as the first generation of children emerge from these so-called faith schools, it would be very interesting to get good research on, well, what are your views on homosexuality? How do you think the world was created? Who is a Muslim? Who is a Christian? And so on. Because I think if we start getting good research on the effects of these schools, then I think that will give us some real tools to argue that they shouldn't exist.
Very good. Yeah. Thank you. Right, we're going to come along just lengthwise now. So would you like to come back on next?
Again, I mean, if the question is, how do we educate the next generation, I think it's quite simple. I think it is so endemic, this idea of religion, and that it seems quite natural for people. The things we are arguing, like, for example, a child doesn't have a religion when they are born. They're not born to a religion. They don't choose what religion they're going to have. But I think historically, religion has played such a powerful role, not just because of the power of its idea, but because of the social status, the power and the political power and the wealth it has had. So it's become so ingrained that I think the challenge is still is quite great. And so I think it's not just a question of education. It is a huge campaigning movement that is required. As we were talking earlier on during the day, we are not dealing, as for example, Marx once said, history is the opium of the people. And I think he said other things. Sorry. Religion. Sorry. I'm being very historical. But I think to apply it now, that would be a very mild critique of religion, because religion is an industry. It's a huge, massive force, and it is comparable to huge multinational companies in terms of its power politically and economically. It is as if it should not be scrutinized. It's as if it is off limits to public scrutiny, that it should be pampered, it should be accepted. And I think that is why, because of this dominating role, that it is making inroads again to back to schools, something people fought for, to have separation of the education school from the system, from the educational system. So it is a question of, just as we fight against the, I mean, this is, I think, the line we should take. We fight against infectious diseases. We fight against tobacco advertising. We fight against the harmful effects of, drugs and, of the mafia, all that on people. And I think that is why religion should not be treated just as an ideology. So it requires a political movement for us to get anywhere near to weakening its disproportionate presence in society.
Thank you. Hamid.
Yeah. I just would like to make 2 points. One, answering that gentleman about the conviction. The thing that I said was just emphasizing what Richard said, that when children born in a, say, liberal family, you don't call him or her a liberal or a conservative, or about the taste in, say, sport or in art. He has eligible to have his or her own belief when he grows up, when he's or she's an adult. But for religion is an exception. And what Richard said about children, I go further and say is true for the adults as well. I'm Muslim, and it's like the color of my skin. I cannot do anything about it. Everybody referred to me as a Muslim because I was born in a Muslim, so to speak, society, because my parents were Muslim, that in their own term they are Muslim because, again, their own parents were Muslim. I mean, religion is not like any other thing. In art, in political beliefs, in science, in social beliefs, it's your own opinion. It has nothing to do with your parents. In religion, when you are born, you are labeled. You are Muslim, you are Christian, or whatever you are. So that's the point that we are saying, and I'm emphasizing that. So it should, religion has nothing to do with actually the process of education or learning or teaching. It is as just Bahram said, it's a huge institute now. And the other point is, that is very related, is, look, we had the rise of political Islam, and all of a sudden everybody is talking about religious schools. That means Muslim schools, of course. No Jew or Buddhist claiming anything yet. But why we are talking about that? In Europe, in the birthplace of secularism, there was a reason that in few generations ago, we had enlightenment here, we have Renaissance here, we fought for humanity and for the freedom of human beings. And now all of a sudden, we go back again to Middle Ages and talking about, are we going to have for each faith minority their own school, or just one is enough, or two is enough? Or if they have the school, should it be publicly funded or not? I mean, what happened here? It is a political problem. It's a political question. It's not because Muslims get more Islamists or more Muslim that now they claim they want to have a school, but 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they wouldn't have such a demand. It is a political, reactionary, anti-human movement which is called political Islam, and all of a sudden we sit here and talk hours about having a school, or is it a religious school or what? In 18th century, 200 years ago, nobody would even question that. Of course, religion has nothing to do with the schools. We had Middle Ages, and we know what that thing means. Putting school or injecting religion to the brain of our children in schools. We know that. We have revolutions. We have so many movements against it. And all of a sudden, again, we are on square one. Terry. Okay.
Yeah, Joan was talking about research, and we found a bit of research which was tucked away in the Guardian Education supplement. And it was by a woman called Irene Bruegel. I think she was at LSE, was she? Yeah.
No, South Bank.
South Bank, yeah. And she'd done this wonderful research into primary schools and how children saw each other and related to each other. And what she found was that children of 5, 6 actually weren't aware that they were different from each other. They weren't aware of their different skin colours, certainly weren't aware of their different religion. And it was only later on that they began to absorb from the rest of society and from their parents that there were differences and that it was something you need to be concerned about. Joan was saying that you weren't aware of your school colleagues' religion. And so Irene Bruegel, who unfortunately died this week, but her point was that if we bring children up together from a point where they don't realize that they're different from each other, the suspicions don't start to arise. They make the friendships, they make the kind of crossovers of culture that only children of that age can make without thinking about it. This is the big danger of faith schools to the future, because we're taking children of that age, separating them from each other and saying, you are different, you are special. They don't get to see each other, particularly children from a Muslim background who may be going back to some kind of ghetto, which they never get out of. They don't get to meet the mainstream doesn't get to meet them. So I think it's very important for the future of race relations in this country and for community relations generally that we stop this kind of artificial separation of children and we bring them together, because unless they're brought together on a daily basis, their friendships will not flourish and the suspicion will just intensify. So I think we've got to really, really challenge this idea that faith schools are somehow good for community cohesion. It's a lot of propaganda from the religious establishments that are so desperate for these schools to continue and to proliferate. So that's the reason why I'm so desperately opposed to faith schools in principle.
One tiny point of information before we move on to Richard Dawkins, that the Economic and Social Research Council has also done some research coming to quite similar conclusions. Richard.
I agree so strongly with what my colleagues have said, all of it. I better say something else. Oh, by the way, on Terry's last point, it's not just the religious leaders who are pushing that, it's also politicians. I mean, especially the new Labour, who seem besotted with the idea of religion. Any religion. I wanted to say something else, which takes off from what quite a lot of my friends have been saying. When I was saying you must never talk about a Christian child or an Islamic child, some of you may have noticed I was about to say never talk about a Jewish child, and then I hesitated. And I think there's a reason for that, which is that just about everybody I know who calls himself or herself a Jew also calls themselves atheists. Say, I'm a Jewish atheist. Nobody ever says I'm a Christian atheist. And there's something there which I won't explore because this is not, this particular conference is not about that. But is there something somewhat analogous in modern Islam? And I think there is. It's not the same thing as the Jewish one, but I think what it is a political label. And various of the panel have talked about the change that's come over Islam. And I suspect that among young Muslim males in this country, it has become a kind of badge of political rebellion. Yes. That Islam has become a flag around which you rally if you want to be anti-American, if you want to be anti the Iraq War. There are various causes, political causes, which many of us here probably subscribe to, and which have been hijacked by Islam as part of their identity. I went on the Great March in London on the eve of the Iraq War, and I expect many people here did. And I enjoyed the sense of group solidarity that was going on until somebody got up, seized the microphone, and shouted, "Allah Akbar!" And I and all my friends walked out at that point. That was a hijacking. It was despicable. But it illustrates what I'm saying, which is that the people young people who purport to believe in Islam, possibly what they really believe in is a kind of in-group identity which has got the Islamic label. And I suspect the same may be true in Northern Ireland, where the difference between Protestants and Catholics is probably not a theological difference. As I've said before, you don't go into a pub with a machine gun and say, "Take that, transubstantiationist Mariolatrist." Idolaters. It's a political label, and religion can become particularly dangerous when it is used as an in-group, out-group label. Right.
Now we're coming to our final third. Now where's the microphone? Did it make its way downstairs? All right. Would you like to, given this guy's done so much for us, would you like to give it to him first? He's changed his mind, has he? Right, okay. Right. The guy at the very back has been most persistent, the one who's waving his pen. So he'd go there first. Now, I beg you to take your 2 sentences, and I'm not taking any more from anyone else because we're starting to run behind time. And I want to give everybody a chance from this side.
Thank you. It's because I'm a journalist, basically, so we're used to raising hands and people. Richard has mentioned a very important point when he said that he talked about the Jewish community and they said, "I'm Jewish atheist." It's the fear among the communities which led to the communities hiding their identity and the fear of their identity. And what seems to be happening here, since about 2 hours I'm listening to this, there's a very small minority in the Muslim groups who could be wearing hijab or whatever. They are not the representative of the whole Muslim world, basically. And we pick up all these 8 girls or 10 girls or maybe a few more. You have seen Joan Smith in Sierra Leone or somewhere else.
Quickly.
So the question I want to ask here is that all the faith schools were working very good education in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all those countries. And I'm one of them who studied there. The students who studied there, they didn't become Christian or Catholics when they come out. Is your fear real, basically, when you talk about that?
Okay, no, that's it. Right. The gentleman there with yes, that one. The gentleman with the stripy shirt. Yeah, there.
Thank you. Richard suggested that the identification of immigrants with Islam might be a failure of politics. Let me suggest also that the government's infatuation with religion is exactly also a failure of politics. It's the failure of New Labour to pursue a sensible political position, and maybe the solution is in that domain.
Right, the guy with the yellow tie behind. Yeah. Now, a woman from this group who wants to ask a question.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Richard Duncan, Norm UK. You're quite right, Joan, when you say that people are forced into wearing the hijab or what have you as a religious symbol to cow them. And Richard's quite right to say there's no such thing as a Muslim child, but the powers that be in the religious world know full well that you can mark somebody's clothes from the beginning by genital mutilation. And I trust that the panel and everybody in this room will join me in condemning coerced, forced, unnecessary genital surgery on all children until they can make up their own mind about their own bodies and their own sexuality.
Right. That guy with the stripy, horizontal stripe, yeah.
To you, Richard, on your point about the Jewish atheists and people like Isaac Deutscher, for example, being a non-Jewish Jew, I think there's an equivalent in the Muslim world. For example, Salman Rushdie, who wants to describe himself as someone who is part of, quote, Muslim culture, but doesn't accept the theology. So I mean, maybe it's a matter of semantics, but I think it can and should exist.
Right. The person with the blue blouse there, and who's got a hand up, right? Right in the middle. And that's the last question, I'm sorry.
On the question of religious education as it is happening now, a few months ago I read the book by Ed Hussein, The Islamist. I was horrified to read that as he was growing up in East London in the late 70s and 80s, the information that was being imparted as part of the multicultural syllabus about Islam, and which he claims, although I have no idea whether it's true, is still being imparted today, was actually overtly political. It wasn't just about spiritual beliefs and rituals and festivals and all the rest of it. He claims that that helped to sow the seeds of political Islam in him and in other children of his generation. And so my question is whether you know about this, is it actually true? Is there anything that could be done about this now by the National Secular Society, the BHA, or by the Council of Ex-Muslims?
Right. Well, my apologies to everyone who hasn't been able to ask a question, but I'm going to ask the panel also to be a little brief now. Perhaps limit themselves to 2 minutes, something like that. Can we start at this end with Richard, please?
Well, taking the last point first, The Islamist is a book well worth reading, and it was partly that I was thinking of in the point that I made just now. I think it's ultimately a disappointing book, because although the author, having been into political Islam in a very big way, finally gets out of it, as far as I can make out, at the end of the book, he's still a Muslim, which is, for me, that was a real letdown. I mean, and it just shows that we've got a long way to go. An earlier question. Can you remind me of what other questions there were? Because I can't remember. Go on.
Right. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I think the question of the hijab is an interesting one. I was doing a program the other day on the Asian network, the BBC Asian network, and the presenter on that was a Muslim herself. She wasn't hijabbed. She was just, an ordinary woman. And I said to her, the question was about religious dress. And I said, how do you cope in your community with it? And there was another Muslim woman on the panel too, and she said, do you know about the carrier bag syndrome? And this other girl said, oh yes, of course I do. And I said, well, I don't. What is it? She said, when I used to go to school, I would take a carrier bag with me. And when I left home, I had the full regalia on, because my parents insisted on it. When we got to the school gates, off it came and into the carrier bag. And we had a whole day of freedom from the hijab. When we came out again, on it went, so we could go home. And I think this is one of the dangers of these Muslim faith schools, is that girls particularly are going to be coerced into doing things that they do not want to do. And the Madani High School in Leicester, which is a state-funded Muslim school, I heard the headmaster of that being interviewed on the radio, and the person asking the question said, well, is your school open? Does it have an open education, admissions policy? And he said, yes, anybody can come to our school. And the man said, well, suppose my daughter wanted to come. Would she have to wear a hijab? And he said, oh yes, a hijab and a jilbab. That's the school uniform. And he said, well, I wouldn't want her to wear that because she's not a Muslim. And he said, that is the price of attending our school. So girls are going to be veiled in this country, whether they want to be or not, if they want to go to that school. And I think this is going to happen more and more as more of these private Muslim schools are brought into the state sector. I think it's tragic, and I hope that there will be a change of policy within the government, and they will turn away from this madness of religious schools?
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to emphasize that point that what we are facing today is a political movement, and it's not because of, say, Muslims somewhere in the world just get more religion or they have more faith than they had, say, 30, 40 years ago. That's not the truth. The truth is that now we have a movement, an Islamic movement. We have Islamism. We don't have Islam as such. Islam, like any religion, as a personal matter, has nothing to do with what's happening now. It's a movement. They are enforcing Islam as a political agenda, as a political flag, as Richard said, against what they are opposed to. And the tragedy is that most of the time people falling for that, following them because of the right causes that they have, because of they think that that's the way that they can have a better life. The same, it happened in Iran 30 years ago when we had that revolution against Shah. People were against Shah, and that's why they follow Khomeini, not the other way. Not because they are good Muslims, they follow Khomeini against Shah. Because politically, they knew that the Shah was a dictator, is not good. They wanted to overthrow that, and the only political leader or movement that was available was Khomeini and Muslims. And what happened that now we have a big tragedy in our history of Iran. And all over the world, we have that movement. I think when we have a question of Muslim or Islamic schools here, or a question of hijab or whatever, it's just a symbol, it's just a political flag that people just raise to say that I'm opposed to USA or I'm opposed to this and that. And we should recognize that and fight with it politically as a political reactionary movement that you have to just defend it in order to go and then deal with those issues in a more proper way and easier way.
Thank you. Bahram.
Very briefly, I think in our discussion of religious schools, I think we should be clear that we're not just objecting to the subsidies, state subsidies, funding of public schools with religious education. I think our objection should be, at least as I see it, is to private schools. It is not as if certain sections of groups in society have the right, prerogative, they can impose a certain set of rules and rights on children which have been in an artificial way designated as belonging to a specific religion, and society has no responsibility towards that. I think it's exactly the opposite. We are responsible, society is responsible to say that religious schools mean fewer rights for our children, for some section of our children, as if they should not enjoy the same rights that all children should enjoy. All these questions about inclusiveness, equality, goes down the drain. It is utter, it's meaningless, utter nonsense when you discuss the question of allowing private education of children, even with privately sourced money, to have a curriculum which is based on religion, religious uniforms, and especially, we are talking about Islamic schools. But the argument, as other members have mentioned, is we cannot be for the abolition of Islamic schools if we are not at the same time for the abolition of all faith schools. And I think we should stick to that.
Joan.
Yes, we should be afraid. It's right to be afraid. We should also be angry, and we should be very forthright and very organised in our opposition to all faith schools. But one of the reasons is that there is a trick going on here. I interviewed a woman who's from West London like me. She's a bit younger than me. And when I interviewed her, she was wearing a jilbab, a niqab, a hijab, and she had an emergency burqa over the back. And in my conversation with her, it became clear that this was an oppositional identity. Richard's point is right, that political Islam is an oppositional identity. It's also a gender-segregated identity. So where the young men go to radical mosques and they fulminate against Jews and homosexuals and women and so on, the women have to do something else. And so what they do is they adopt this what they call modest identity. However, you know, when you hear the kind of things that come out of the mouths of those women, I mean, this woman said, you know, we have to put up with so much in society. And I said, like what? And she said, rampant homosexuality and women having more than one boyfriend at once, which I thought was completely brilliant coming from a religion which allows men to have 4 wives. But of course, you know, that is not going to resonate in what is still largely a secular Western European Enlightenment culture. And so I think that political Islam sees faith schools and the imposition of the hijab and that identity on little girls as a very fertile breeding ground for their recruitment when those children get older, and that is why it is so wrong. And that is why I think we have to stop worrying about offending people and just be absolutely clear that this is wrong.
Right. Richard only had a short one.
Come back on. I think there was a slight contradiction. I got a bit uneasy when Terry was talking about the story of the father who wanted to know whether his daughter could go to an Islamic school, and the headmaster said, well, yes, but she'll have to wear the hijab because that's the school uniform. I mean, in a way, that chimes in with what Joan was saying, that she didn't mind wearing school uniform because that's the school uniform. And when the father objected, he was objecting on religious grounds. In a way, that was playing into their hands because he was sort of accepting that it was a religious badge of identity rather than just a school uniform. I don't know what I think about this because I sort of feel there's something a bit draconian about the French policy, for example, of forbidding wearing the hijab, until I reflect that you wouldn't allow, I mean, if the school has a uniform, then that's one of the rules, and you play by the rules. What I object to is the privileging of religion, where you can say religion is your excuse for getting out of the rules. No other excuse will do. It's a bit like the draft in America, when I was living in America at the time of the Vietnam War. People trying to get out of going to Vietnam. If you were a brilliant young moral philosopher who'd written a thesis on the evils of war, you would have had a harder time getting conscientious objector status than if you could simply say, my parents are Quakers. So it's just an absolute free pass. Religion gets a free pass all the time, and that's the thing I would really like to finally object to, is the fantastic privileging of religion in our society and in all societies throughout every aspect of our life. People said it in different ways. We must stop being so respectful. Nobody has a right not to be offended. Children must not be indoctrinated in particular religions. It's the privileging of religion which rears its head over and over and over again.
Right, now that's the end of the first half of the debate. I'm known for my wish to make sure that all sides are properly represented. So those who are in favour of young girls being compulsorily hijabbed from the age of 7, and for as many schools as possible to be Muslim schools, if they could kindly just put up their hands now. Oh, well, there we are. I did try. Right. Now, it is my honour to thank, on your behalf, I thought a magnificent panel, and we're really honoured to have people of such calibre answering the questions so eloquently and frankly. And could you like to express your thanks to them in your way? Now, Finally, I'm going to sign off in the same way as all of my predecessors as chairs and give an advertisement. So I'm going to describe the National Secular Society as the high-profile campaigning organisation dedicated to promoting secularism in the UK and outright opposition to religious schools, and in particular minority religious schools. And my compulsory plug is at the back. There is the stall with lots of interesting Yuletide cards, books and goodies. So on your way out. Right, thank you.
Not yet.